going from the landscape to, or what I call the macroscape to the microscape, and we're looking at the panel itself, I want to just quickly look at some of the approaches to looking at the panel itself. And again, it's got me thinking. Again, it's just talking to people, like-minded people within rock art. One of the most important influences to me was Jean Clot, who was a French rock art specialist who did most of the work, or a lot of the most sterling work, on Chauvet Cave. And he has looked at it in detail many, many times. And it got me thinking because when I was originally a BUM student, a lousy art student, one of my first things I had to do as an art student was to draw the space between a chair, or underneath or around the chair. And again, just think about the one. If you're drawing the chair, but you're not drawing the chair, you're drawing the space behind it, it gets you to think about the subject in a very, very different way. So you've got your subject, the thing, and you've got the space behind. And the space behind seems quite interesting because, again, I talked to you earlier on in our introduction about the idea of context and how things fit within a context. And again, this is a quite important thing. And looking at rock art itself, this idea of texture and contour seems to be very interesting as well. A lot of modern contemporary artists seem to be using texture within their canvas. And again, I'll draw you to the most obvious one, people like Paul Cézanne, for example, who's an impressionist who did a lot of work using very, very hard, what I call hard paints, hard oil onto canvas. So where you've got the texture of the oil coming through onto the canvas, which gives you that little bit more of an advantage if you're trying to produce something which is 3D in 3D modelling. So the texture and the contour appears to be an important thing in contemporary art. We can then suggest, therefore, that a similar sort of thing is going on with prehistoric art. And again, how do we prove this? Well, again, some of the papers we've had already, and I commend Alexander for his work, and about clearly there's something going on there. Obviously, we can't get into the mindset of these ancient artists, but there is something going on with how the panel is being chosen. It's not just being chosen willy-nilly. Sorry, it's an English term. It's not being chosen haphazardly. It's been a great thought and ideology is coming into how these sites are being chosen. And again, I've chosen probably one of the most difficult areas to talk about, which is the VALCAMONICA, which is in northern Italy, which is an alpine area. And within that alpine area, there are around about 400,000 images, mainly all carved images, and they date mainly from the Neolithic and Bronze Age. And again, there's some very interesting things going on there, which tells me that the panels are being chosen very, very carefully. They're intimate, they're difficult to get to, they're not on the valley floor, but they're on this intermediate slope. And again, this is something which is more important is that they are not just hidden, but if you and I were to go into that landscape and look for rock art, or look for a rock art panel, we see these beautiful smooth panels as big as this room with no rock art on it. So the question you have to ask yourself, well, what's the mindset going on there? Obviously, the best panels are not being used in a 21st century mindset. The best panels are not being used. It's these more intimate panels which are being used and taken advantage of. So, what do contours do within the rock art panel? What does the micro-topography tell us? Well, both inside and outside the VALCAMONICA, as we've seen with the Norwegian examples, for example, landscape is never portrayed. There's no mountains, no streams, no valleys, no spurs. You're looking at purely subject matter. So it could be a figure, it could be a human figure, animal figure, it could be an abstract design, but very little. I can only think of, again, a couple of areas around the world, or a couple of sites around the world, where you have actual landscape, and that's usually a few trees. That's about it. You've also got the micro-topography of the rock surface. Could be part of that landscape, and again, I've sort of made some theoretical papers on that idea, purely based on the topography and where particular designs are located. However, I think it's an important point to consider is that the artistic endeavour is a parody. We're looking at the perfect hunt, we're looking at the perfect sex scene, we're looking at the perfect animal. And again, so really in many respects, we're not looking at real life. And again, I draw your attention to things like the Spanish Levant, where you've got some very, very good hunter-gatherer scenes there, where they always catch their animal. The animal never escapes. But we know in reality, hunter-gatherers lose about 75% of their prey because they haven't hunted correctly. So again, sort of an interesting point to consider. The other thing as well, that the contours of the rock art within a geographic context, generally, which are outside, generally tend to be brought into, in terms of the VALCAMONICA, into the actual micro-topography of the panel itself. And again, this is what I mean by intimacy. This is a lovely picture of a house structure here, a timber-framed house, I hasten to add, about 1,500 years before the timber framing traditions hit Europe, so it's an old one. You've got hunters, and again, just put you as a slight digression here, where you've got very interesting sort of thing happening in the Bronze Age, Iron Age in the VALCAMONICA, in that, first of all, you have, as a chronology, hunting and fighting and warrior scenes occurring, and then these are then pacified by domestic scenes at some point during the Middle Iron Age. So it's a very interesting, almost a complete dichotomy of what is going on. You've got power and fighting and prowess, male mainly, and then suddenly from the Iron Age onwards, you've got this passive housing, domestic scenes. And again, what you've got here is usually these guys here are usually incorporated into the scene. Now, the proof of the pudding is that, take my word for it, this is actually a human figure, which was a warrior, a very large warrior, with a head, arms stuck out like that, and I would lay a pound to money that one of these lines here represents a sword. So what's happened is that this warrior has been pacified, quite rightly so. Too much violence in this world. And you've got these all over, but they're in very, very odd places within the landscape. So again, there's an interesting point there to consider. So in terms of the landscape, or in terms of the rock art distribution, we have 5 probable areas where rock art occurs. We have the fertile valley, where there's really no rock art at all, unless you have the odd rock surface on that sort of part of the lower part of the intermediate slopes. We also have the wooded intermediate slopes where a lot of rock art is occurring, but again, we have to be very, very careful, because when we're looking at the VALCAMONICA, we're looking at a wooded valley now, but at the time, probably during the Iron Age and Bronze Age and Neolithic, it probably wasn't. And again, we have imports of the dreaded eucalyptus and the dreaded sweet chestnut. And these are imports. These have come into the landscape in the last, well, certainly in the historic period. We've only got the alpine, and this is where I started looking stupidly and found nothing. And I've even gone into the snow line stupidly and found nothing. And bugger me, bless me, in the the Rocky Mountain summits, found nothing at all. So quite clearly, there's that small zone of rock art which occurs in this sort of tree-lined valley and steep slopes. And again, I would say, in many respects, this is a very difficult landscape to manoeuvre in, especially if you're my age and get panting and puffing and trying to get your breath. But the economic part of the valley is here. So Capitaponte, all these little villages, which are actually Iron Age, maybe Bronze Age in origin, are being farmed. But anybody who's really stupid like me, wants to look at the rock art, or produce rock art 4,000 years ago, would have to climb onto some of these very, very steep slopes to get to the rock art panel. But what is really interesting is that you do have these little plateaus creeping up, where you do sometimes have small field systems right high up in the valley. And it's, again, reminiscent of the alpine regimes of Switzerland and Austria and Italy, whereby in the summer you bring your sheep and goats up to the grazing areas up in the mountains, and then in the winter you bring them down and you keep them in the house. And again, that's probably another time to talk about that. Those are the 9 rock art areas we have along the VALCAMONICA Valley. It goes into Switzerland. There is, take a word for it, more rock art over here, but the majority of the VALCAMONICA Valley is here, and we've got rock art, as I said to you, within those intermediate slopes, and they're all clustered as well, which is interesting. So Lequane is a big rock art area of about 120 panels. Then we have other panels, the Foca de Nadre, which is here, right here, somewhere on Paspado, and so on and so forth. So we have very, very large clusters. Now again, a little digression, between here and here, there's lots of panels which should be used, which I would have used, but they're not used. So quite clear, the people who are producing this rock art are probably tribal or clan groups who are identifying themselves within that particular part of the valley. Looking at the tactile qualities of the surface, and I'm coming onto the surface thing now, on the surface micro-topography now, we're looking at location, we're looking at the inclination, the angle of the slope, and again I think it's important, I've done some experimentation on that. The colour of the surface, which is obviously the geology of the rock, the micro-topography of the surface, and you'll see as I show you, some of this is very, very sort of contoured indeed in itself. The lustre of the surface, so the tangible feel of it, I think is important. Remember, it's a glacial valley, so it's been smoothed, it's been polished smooth by the glaciers, so it's a very, very tactile surface to touch. It's accessibility and inaccessibility, and I will go on the point of inaccessibility, as probably Kate can probably vouch for that. The rock art patination, and again, it's an interesting battle we've had with a lot of rock art, is how long did the patination last when you were making your pecking? Is it 50 years, 100 years? We still see it today because we're still recording it today, but at the time of its execution, it would have been very, very clear indeed. And this is what we're looking at. We're looking at a very, very contoured surface. And I'm going to whiz through these slides because I'm going to get told off by my co-organiser here. But as you can see, you've got these wonderful gullies where the water flows seasonally. So in the winter, you've got a lot of high rainfall, the water flows down here. So you think to yourself, wow, what's going on there? If you've got water flowing down these gullies, do you have rock art? And the answer is yes. But what sort of rock art do we have? So we're looking at the micro-topography. What can it do? It angles the rock, it shapes the rock into something meaningful, and again I'll come to that in a minute. It creates channels, gullies and ponds, and again it's like pools, which is again something I'll be showing you a little bit later on. It creates an exposure, shade and texture to the rock itself. It forms part of an ongoing erosional process, so it's still going on, and again it's a bit of a problem for people like Paul who's trying to work out the conservation for these sort of sites. It naturally decorates the rock art in the mosses and lichens, and it creates an ideal undulating canvas for the artist. And this is probably the most important site that we have within the VALCAMONICA on the eastern side, so the Bedolina map. And as you can see there, it's a Bedolina map. It's showing a village. And again, what we've got here, the artist, he or she, has been very, very clever in how they've pegged these images. So you've got houses. You've got these things called topographics, which are actually field systems. So what they're actually mapping out, maybe through taxation purposes, we don't know, but what they're mapping out is a village and its curtilage, the curtilage of what that village owns or what it represents. And what is really interesting is the way that this village, and I'll go to the next slide, which I think is more important, is the contour of it. So at this edge here, we're looking at maybe a 15-degree angle. When we get to about here, it's near vertical. So just go back one image. We've got here ladders, we've got a series of ladders in fact, and we've also got a series of field systems. But clearly you don't have a ladder on the ground flat, do you? You need a ladder upright. You need a ladder upright to climb the ladder to get to where you want to get to. So clearly the artist has chosen the vertical nature of that part of the panel to suggest that to climb or to get to the next level of the valley, you need to climb a series of ladders. And again, I'll just whiz through this slide here. There's another panel with the ups and downs of that slope. And these are all on vertical. All the ladders recorded, which are Iron Age in date, are on vertical, near vertical panels. Again, replicating what you'll be doing in real life. You don't climb a ladder horizontally, you climb it vertically. And that leads to places like this, which are field systems. And that zigzag line there, and go back a couple of slides, you've got them on here as well. You've got zigzag lines here. And again, a colleague of mine, Craig Alexander, who's just finished a PhD actually on this site, suggests that what you're doing, because you don't go up to a slope vertically, you have to manoeuvre it by meandering up a path. And again, if any of you have been walking on the mountains like I have, you don't want to go up because when you get to my age, you're puffing your brains out. You go casually on a zigzag line up these slopes to get to these very, very tall cliffs. And believe you me, those tall cliffs do exist in the VALCAMONICA. They're very dangerous indeed. To these upper pastures, these topographics, as they are called, these field systems. So again, some very interesting things going on there. And I've conclude with this little story here. Just below the Bedolina panel, about 20 years ago, someone moved some turf about 10 metres from above this panel, so just above behind here, and found another rock art site, Bedolina 2, surprise, surprise. And what we had on top, underneath this turf, was this lovely natural pool here. And again, this is very, very important. Somebody, I'm sure it's from somebody from, I hope it's from the Iron Age, it's not a George Nash graffiti expert, but somebody has put a little groove in there. And again, just one slight digression, I'm doing a similar sort of work on the Azores at the moment, right in the middle of the Atlantic, and surprise, surprise, a similar sort of thing is happening with nearly all of the natural pools there. So there's little grooves in. Anyway, this groove is, where it rains, when you move the water comes over the topographics. Now, quite clearly, here's a classic sort of 21st century mindset think, but that water is going over fields which need to be irrigated by water. So clearly the artist, I hope he's doing, or he or she was doing this, put that groove in so when it rained and it toppled over, when the water toppled over that, it would then irrigate all the field systems Bedelian 2, again using the micro-topography. And the final one to think about, and again, a colleague of mine, Angela Fasati, has been working on this one, again, looking at utilising the grooves, these wonderful gullies which have been made by glaciers. These are a series of praying figures, which you get a lot in the VALCAMONICA. And again, I think Kate, you probably recorded many of these. Row of them, this is on a site near Nakwane, and you've got two figures here, which are, again, praying figures, but they're lying down, so they're lying the other way, and there's a nice drawing which has been done by Angelo. And again, this is a sort of idea of water taking the dead away into the next world. It's just a lovely story. And again, we see it within the ethnography. So we can probably suggest that a similar sort of thing is going on if we are to assume that these are praying figures or figures who are mourning for the two figures here. We could be just simply that someone's going for a swim and using the gullies. But the gullies, again, are being cleverly manipulated to create this system. And then finally, this is the final couple of slides. This is a site very near Nakwane where you have the striations of the glaciers where they've been actually enhanced to produce spears. Again, just a very, very clever thing to do with a natural topography of the rock art. And you've got very, very simple spears. You've also got elaborate spears as well. And again, these are sort of late Bronze Age, middle to Middle Iron Age in date. But again, just showing you how the topography, the micro-topography of the panel is sorted out. So in summary, what we're looking at here is there's an intentionality of design. So people are doing this. They are thinking very hard about where they want to put their rock art site. And again, it's not how we think. We would think otherwise. We think, oh, look at that lovely panel there. Let's carve there. But they're not. They're carving in very, very different places. And we, don't understand that, why they're doing that. Landscape is present on the panel surface, albeit in a very subtle way. And again, I think hopefully that some of the papers we've had today demonstrate that. The attributes of natural elements on the panel surface are being used, such as the striations, for example, the gullies. The topography of the contour plays, I think, a very interesting vital role in 3D narrative. And again, that's another lecture, but there are some very interesting things going on there with 3D narrative. Both the imagery and the panel surface act to harmonise and create a semiotic grammar, because these things are being repeated all the way throughout. Again, I urge you, if you ever go to Northern Italy, go and look at Nakwane, because you'll see this grammar being repeated again and again and again and again and again. And again, there's got to be a reason why this is happening. And then finally, the various elements of the panel, including the rock art, probably recreates the real world. And again, one thing I have not seen within this particular topography, within this particular assemblage of figures, is very much associated with symbolic or symbolism or religion. Most of it's been sort of this domestic, battle between warriors and maleness and the passiveness of the house and the domestic. Thanks very much.